Hello literature connoisseurs. Let's begin. Chapter 8 begins with Buck talking to his boss, and Buck learns that Nicolae was elected president of Romania. He and Buck go back and forth with banter about how Buck gets accused of knowing everything. Then his boss sarcastically says Buck is very humble about acting as if he knows everything. His boss says there is no story to Nicolae getting elected, but Buck argues with him. They continue to argue about certain key individuals that support Nicolae and how they are the power behind him. Buck continues to argue that there is a story while his boss dismisses the notion. His boss gives him an ultimatum: either he do the Nicolae story or he can do a piece on the disappearances. Buck tries to say he can blend the stories, but then his boss accuses him of being sleep-deprived. He makes a remark about Jewish nationalists trying to build a one-world government. Christians believe that after the rapture that the Antichrist will rise to power and establish a one-world government. During this time, God is going to unleash plagues and disasters to punish those left behind. A certain list that gets broken up into groups of 7s is supposed to get released in a certain order. We will get into more on this later on. The Jewish nationalists' remark sounds like more of the author's propaganda. They cowardly toss in these little jabs hoping they get overlooked. There is no greater hate than Christian love. It's funny how they pride themselves on loving everyone, except Jews, members of the LGBTQ+ community. Women, non-believers, people of other religions, and even people of their own religion. Seriously, the love of Christ sure seems to hate and despise everyone. The Book of Revelations mentions that the Jewish temple is in existence during this period of judgment. In roughly 70 CE the temple was destroyed for a second time. Supposedly the author of the Book of Revelations wrote the book in 90 CE. The book hints that the Antichrist sets up a deal to allow the temple to be rebuilt. This gets mentioned along with an anti-Semitic remark about being overrun by Jews. Just to make sure their jab at the Jewish nationalists was understood, they added that vile gem to the mix. Buck goes home making comments about the cabs, and the scene changes to Rayford. Rayford suffers from depression as he reminisces about his parents. He recalls how they had strokes but they were lucid. With his wife and son gone he feels very alone. A weird comment gets made that says Rayford's parents are older than Rayford's peers. It may be a typo in the copy I have, because that would go without saying. It's like saying water is wet or that fish swim. A peer is someone that is roughly the same age and level as the person, so a peer of Rayford would be about his age. His parents would have to be older because they could not be the same age, or younger than Rayford when he was born. Granting that Rayford was added by mistake, it would make sense to say his parents were younger than his parents' peers. Rayford reflects on his life as he flip-flops between being happy and unhappy with the way his life turned out. It is described that he had a midlife crisis at age 30 because he had gray hairs appearing and his co-workers made fun of him. He was called names like grandpa and this upset him. He goes on to talk about his children and he says he loves them, then talks about how much of a burden they were to him. Their birth gets described as causing his wife and him to become depressed because of them. This led him to become an alcoholic. Basically Father of the Year, insert eye roll here. The authors have gone out of their way to paint Rayford and Buck as being irredeemable, horrible people. By doing this they have alienated their audience. There are no qualities the readers can relate to, which makes the readers give up on the novel because they don't care about the characters. There are nothing that makes the readers care what happens to the characters. In the Game of Thrones book series, we get numerous characters that the readers love and hate. So even when characters are painted in a bad light that makes the reader hate them, the hook becomes the anticipation that the character, in question, will die horribly to satisfy the reader that a form of justice has been done. For the likable and loved characters, their gruesome deaths create an emotional response by the reader. However, because this is a Christian novel, it becomes known that nothing satisfying will happen to the characters as the story gets watered down. It seems as if the authors try to make Buck and Rayford into Pauline-type characters. where they get described as terrible human beings, then they find Jesus and become great people everyone likes. This tactic hints at saying to the reader that if you are a terrible person, that Jesus can make you better. The trouble is, again, the characters are not relatable and the point becomes irrelevant. Because of bigoted comments and how the characters are portrayed, all that gets shown is how vain, self-absorbed, and egotistical Christians are. Who wants to be like that? The rest is Rayford feeling sorry for himself, and he flip-flops as more contradictions come out. An example is a coworker calls Rayford handsome, but he thinks of himself as being an egghead. This is nonsense, because Rayford has not once presented anything that would make him fit his view of himself. He describes how much he hates his wife and kids, then says he feels so unworthy of them. To sum up, it's more nonsense. Hattie calls because she wants someone to talk to and is looking for human companionship. Rayford makes up an excuse about waiting for his daughter to call to hide the fact he doesn't want to talk to her. All the nonsense of him being lonely, and the first chance he gets for companionship he pushes them away. This is stupid. It reminds me of the cat meme posted on the screen. This becomes yet another example why the characters are unsympathetic and not relatable, because had this been an actual person they would have done more to reach out if they were really lonely. It's funny he cares about his daughter, all of a sudden calling, after the blasé comment about the possibility of his daughter dying in a plane crash. Scene changes to Buck and he tries calling his conspiracy theory friend but is unable to reach him. He suddenly gets a call from Hattie saying how lonely she is and explains how Rayford was once her friend, now he keeps brushing her off. She explains that she needs someone to talk to, but Buck pretends to care as he rolls his eyes and makes insensitive comments about her to himself. Basically asking himself things like, doesn't she have any friends she can bother? Buck pushes her off, trying to smooth things between her and Rayford. Remember the BS stated earlier at the newspaper staff were hugging and cheering each other on? This is why that scene becomes unconvincing and why the characters are unsympathetic to the readers. She calls Rayford again and this time he asks about her family. We learn that she has not lost anyone in her family. Then why is she grieving and feeling alone? Rayford gets rid of her again and describes that he hates her because she's wasting his time when his daughter, that he doesn't really care about, could be trying to call him. This ends Chapter 8. See you next time for Chapter 9.